So thank you guys for joining us today. I'm really excited for this program. It feels like we've been waiting for this like a really long time, and all of a sudden now we're here. I hope that you all picked up your craft kits and you have those in front of you. If not, if you could grab those and get ready on a nice workstation if you have one at home. But thank you for joining us for Nature Inspired Collage Workshop. I'm Jamie, the Adult Program Coordinator at the Deerfield Public Library, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to artist and educator Christina Lovering. Christina's work reflects her interest in stories of nature and its reaction to man-made changes in the environment. She implements these ideas with the use of watercolor paintings, ink, and graphite drawings, as well as collage, which you'll be seeing a little bit of today. So yes, so if you missed the intro, if you could grab your kit, if you don't have that on you yet, get that ready. And this program is being recorded, so if there's something that you miss, I will be sending the link out probably on Monday, so you can refer to that. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. If you have anything for Christina, if you have a question for me, you can put that in the chat and I'll be monitoring that. So otherwise, if we don't have any urgent questions right now, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. All right, thank you everybody for signing up for this workshop. I'm really excited to do this. I was telling Jamie this is my first Zoom workshop, although I teach full time, so I'm pretty versed in teaching on Zoom, but different topics and different age level. As Jamie said, you'll need to get your art kits ready, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of the hope for this workshop in terms of timing and what we'll be able to accomplish today. And then I'm going to walk you through various steps in the process. And then you'll have some time to work along with me and ask questions while you work. And hopefully by the end of this workshop, you'll have something close to a finished collage, if not finished, but we'll see. So a little bit about me. Jamie did a great job introducing me. So my background originally is in art education and art history. I was a K-12 art teacher for about 10 years, and now I work as an English language learners or ESL teacher at a junior high, and I love it. I still do a lot of artwork on the side, and so that's kind of what brings us here today. I kind of started off in college and a little bit before that interested in drawing and more two-dimensional works and collage work, and also got into printmaking a lot while I was in college and just after college. And then the last, like about the last 12 years, wow, or 10 years, I've been focused a lot on botanical art and illustration, although I'm not quite as strict as the field is. I tend to be a little too stylistic for the strict field of botanical illustration, but I got my certificate in botanical illustration at the Chicago Botanic Garden back in 2016, I think. And so I work a lot with nature in terms of subject matter. As Jamie said, I'm really interested in kind of the interdependence between nature and human interaction. And so I've been kind of working through that in my artwork a lot in the last couple of years. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to talk a little bit next about collage and why collage, and then we'll go through what you have in your supply kit and some design considerations, and then we're going to get started with some demos and some time to work. And like Jamie said, if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I'm totally okay with that. It gives me kind of a sense of if I'm moving too fast or too slow or too confusing, whatever it might be. Okay, so you heard about me. Now let's talk a little bit about collage. There's a lot of kind of generalities about collage, but in terms of what I do with it, I reasons I like it, reasons I think it's kind of a valuable art form, is because for one thing, it's got this level of experimentation to it and intuition that's more fluid and flexible. But at the same time, it can also be really deliberate, really meaningful, depending on how you put things together. And then similar, if any of you keep a sketchbook or a journal, it allows you to layer ideas together, build up that surface texture and history in your artwork. And it's also a really great way to revisit old ideas or old drawings. Sometimes I go into these slumps where I'm not sure what I want to do. I just know I want to work with my hands. And so I'll go back into my sketchbook and find some things that I can maybe transfer to another surface and collage with. And then the last thing is that you never have to commit to a particular medium, which is really good for me because I have a hard time saying I'm just a watercolor artist or just a pencil artist or colored pencil, whatever it might be. I don't like to commit to that. So collage is kind of a nice way to avoid that if it's difficult for you like it is for me. Okay, so and then these are just some examples of my mixed media work. Most of these, some of these are on paper, some of them are on stretched canvas, some of them are on wood panel. Just to kind of give you an idea of what I do when I collage, I tend to combine a lot of paper with paint and then draw an imagery over top. And so that's how I approach it, and that's sort of the method I'll show you today. But again, you know, the nice thing about collage and art in general is that, you know, there are definitely skills and tools and elements to keep in mind when you're creating things. But after that, you know, it's up to you how you want to put things together. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to just talk a little bit about what you have in your pack, just so that we all have a common vocabulary and you know, if there's any questions about anything, you can ask. All right, so so you got a supply kit that looks like this, and you can go ahead and open it if you have not opened it yet. The list here is everything that you should have in it. So you've got a primed and painted 8-inch stretched canvas. So that's the surface that we're going to collage on today. You've got a selection of papers in your bag that are good for collaging. There's all different kinds. Some of them are from old books. Some of them are from scrapbooking packs. Some of them are different handmade papers from around the world. And then you should all have a couple of old postage stamps too. You know, when I'm collaging, I like to combine different types of elements into my work, different things that can bring different meaning to it. And then you should, in your Ziploc, you have 3 containers, and I did label them because we definitely don't want to mix up the paint and the glue. So you should have a container that says glue. That is a PVA glue, which stands for polyvinyl acetate. It's basically just a white glue that is, in this case, acid-free for artwork. And then we also have a white acrylic paint, a navy blue acrylic paint, and then you have a foam brush and a micron pen that is a navy or indigo color. I took some of the decision making away from you today because it is only a 2-hour workshop. So I sort of made an executive decision that we're working in blues, but obviously the papers are in all different colors, so you can you know, step away from that as you want. And if you have other things, I understand that a lot of you have taken a lot of the workshops at the library. So if you have other supplies, you are definitely welcome to incorporate those. But my goal for all of you was to just have something that was just ready to go so you could just get started today and hopefully finish something or be close to finishing it. Okay, so you've got your foam brush, you've got your pen. The other items that you'll need to have that were emailed to you, just kind of household items, are a pencil and eraser, a pair of scissors, a little cup for water, paper towels, some sort of a small surface It could be wax paper, a piece of cardboard, a piece of scrap paper, whatever you want. I'm using like a little piece of chipboard today to work with when you're spreading glue across your pieces of paper, just so you don't get your surface all messed up. And then 1 or 2 paintbrushes that are suitable for acrylic painting. I like to use the nylon brushes, round ones. Any sizes you have are fine. I think I suggested between size 1 and 4. And then if you have a picture of something that you'd like to incorporate in drawing or a actual item, you should have that nearby as well. Okay, are there any questions so far? All right. Okay, so when I start a piece, this is just kind of the way in which I start it, just to give you a sense of where we're going. And then we'll kind of get started with some demoing. So sometimes I have like a vision already of where I want to go. And I kind of get things ready accordingly. And sometimes I just build up the surface of the canvas and then let that kind of drive my composition. So it's really up to you. I mean, that's one thing that's maybe difficult in a way about teaching collage, because if you're someone who likes to have like a set purpose from the get-go, collage can be a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning because it is a little bit more fluid and what's the word, kind of like improvisational, I guess. But it can be very intentional. So again, depending on how all of you work, you can make this work for you. So the first thing we always do is paint the surface of the collage surface. So in your case, I took the liberty to do that so that we wouldn't have to wait for it to dry, and we could just get started collaging right away. So yours is already painted, it's blue. And then we want to look at papers that you have in your pack and think about how you want to use them in your piece. I usually build up the background first. And so, so sometimes I tear them, sometimes I rip them, sometimes I create very deliberate shapes out of the papers. And then we glue them in place. And that's just a first layer. With collage, there's a lot of back and forth. So we might not necessarily be done gluing papers in this first stage. And then we can use acrylic paint or ink to create more unity and a relationship with those layers. And I'll show you what I mean by that as we get started. All right, so our first step here is to kind of think about what we have in front of us and start layering some papers over the surface. And if you already have like a vision of what you want to do or the item that you're choosing to draw, you can kind of take that into consideration. And so I'm going to just demonstrate how to use the glue and glue down some pieces. And definitely, you know, feel free to ask questions as we go. And so let's see. So I'm gonna, I guess maybe, I don't know if I should stop sharing my screen and then pin the demo camera, or what the best.
Either way works for you. They can still unmute as you are.
Okay. If I, okay, maybe I stop, should I stop sharing or just spotlight the other one? I just tried.
You can maybe stop sharing and then we'll get that one spotlighted, I think. Okay.
There we go. Okay. All right. So, so we've got our canvas in front of us and we've got our glue. And so your glue, you're going to want to use a foam brush. So the foam brush that was supplied, and your surface that you're okay with getting a little messy with the glue, because the key to gluing collaged items is you want them to lie flat. That's one nice thing about the PVA glue, is if you do a nice thin coat, it will lie flat, but you do have to go edge to edge. So I'm just kind of adjusting here to make sure you can see. So I've got a piece of the blue collage paper here, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to take my foam brush, and I'm just going to dip a little bit, kind of let it drip off so it's not oozing everywhere. And then I start from like the middle of a piece and kind of brush out. And so you can kind of see, you can see that it's, you can see the whiteness of the glue, but it's not drippy. So it's very thin. And I'm brushing right off the edge of the paper. And that way it kind of stays down wherever you put it. And this glue, when applied thinly, it does dry pretty quick to be workable as we're working on other aspects of the collage. But if you were working on something on your own, you know, sometimes it's a good idea to let things fully dry before you start, you know, drawing over them and things like that. But we're kind of on a time crunch, and this is a pretty thin coat, so it's okay. So now you can see that I'm going to lay this over my canvas, maybe just along the edge here. And I just kind of lay it down. I do have some pieces going over the edge, and that's okay. I can either wrap it around the canvas to kind of give it a clean corner, or I can cut it off later with an X-Acto knife. That's, you know, that's not a big deal. So you can see I'm just kind of building up the texture here using some papers. Now that's a ripped piece of paper. I've also pre-cut some kind of like leaf shaped paper, since this is a nature inspired collage workshop, that I will apply glue to and arrange on my canvas in an interesting way. So what I'm going to do briefly before I leave you to it for gluing for a few minutes is I'm going to jump back to the presentation and just talk a little bit about composition. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so we'll keep gluing in a moment, but just so that you've got, you know, kind of a firm grasp of where we're going, I just want to talk a little bit about composition. Now, this can be something that develops over time as you're bringing things into your collage, but one thing you want to do is consider the focal point. Usually in this stage, when I'm just gluing things down, I'm not necessarily worried about that right away because I'm building up my background. But some people use collage layering to add an area that's going to become the focal point later on. The other compositional consideration is to either think about the rule of thirds when you're deciding where things can go, or using groups of three. I personally like to use groups of three a lot in my drawings and collages. So I actually intentionally gave everybody a strip of butterflies that have 3 butterflies. So if collage and drawing is new to you and you kind of want like an instant, easy compositional success, I recommend doing something with the 3 butterflies, cutting them out. I'll show one of my examples in a moment so you can see what I mean by that. And then also, as we get going here, a lot of times to create a sense of unity, I use color to create that. And like I said, I've done some of that guesswork for you, just deciding on the background color and the paint colors. But as you go on to create your own pieces, that's something to consider as well. So I'm going to just real quickly show an example that I made a couple weeks ago with the same supply kit that you got. So like I said, repetition, repeating 3 items can create kind of an instant sense of strong composition, because our eyes tend to like triangles, things that kind of form in triangles. So you can see I've cut out those butterflies and I've sort of placed them in a way that helps our eye travel throughout the piece. And then it also keeps our eye moving within the piece as well. So you can see I kind of added these arrows just to show that idea that our that our eye tends to kind of flow within this area in the piece. So this is a finished collage, but I just wanted to show you kind of where you could go as you're building up your layers, and what kinds of things to be thinking about as you're cutting your papers or ripping your papers, and starting to build up that surface layer. And another thing to think about is, I've kind of mentioned it already, but just how the eye will travel throughout the piece. So considering things like size or scale, like how big one thing is compared to something else, repetition, repeating an element somehow, line. So you can see like in this piece, we've got the butterflies that are kind of forming a line, forming a triangle for our eyes, but then I've used a lot of like vertical elements in the plant life that I drew in the background as well. Even this one's kind of curving, this little flower here, which is actually a cutout piece. So I actually cut this out of paper and glued it down. So just different things to kind of keep the eye moving towards where you want your viewer to see. So I'm going to go back to the demo area and I'm just going to continue gluing things down to the canvas. And as I'm doing that, feel free to ask questions or show what you're doing. Anything, any comments or thoughts that you have are welcome. And again, you might, I've obviously had to think some of this through just to make sure that I can show things properly in a 2-hour window. But I do understand that a lot of you are thinking, right? Thinking about what to do and where to put things. The nice thing about collage is that, at least the buildup of papers on your surface can be a little bit, go with the flow, a little improvisational or flexible. So right now I'm just adding glue to the backs of some of the papers that I've pre-cut. Again, thin coat using the foam brush and the glue in your kit. And then I might think about where I want these to fall on my canvas and press them down. I'm going to try to raise my demo space a little bit just so you can see a little more. It's kind of close frame. Okay. Okay. So I've kind of pre-cut out some of these shapes. I'm usually a fan of ripping paper. I kind of like the organic look of torn paper and just applying it in different ways that way. But I also have been thinking about spring lately, and the magnolia trees are starting to bud. So I thought maybe I could do some magnolia leaves, although those actually usually come after the flowers. So this is kind of a stage where you can just build up some layers in your work. And again, if anyone has any questions at all, feel free to yell out. It will not bother me at all. So typically I build up like the background with the papers, and then I usually go back in and add, either some kind of an accent paint color or a paint color that will kind of unify all the separate paper elements. And then I think about where I'm going to add my drawn elements, things that I've sketched out. So that usually comes towards the end, and I'll talk about different approaches for that. So again, it gets a little messy on this scrap paper. Sometimes if it gets too messy, I've actually folded this tag board in half. So once it gets just too messy to keep gluing edge to edge on this kind of surface, I usually just kind of fold it the other way so I have a clean surface, and then it glues itself shut. So that's one thing you can do just to kind of keep from getting glue everywhere. The other thing that's nice, I do collage on paper also. And I do usually with that, I incorporate like pen and watercolor. But you cannot be too sloppy with your glue in that case. And you shouldn't be with this either. But with canvases, you can seal it later, and the seal usually gets rid of any sort of uh, goo mistakes. They get kind of clouded over. So try to put this in a way that's a little easier to see. So you can see right now I'm just kind of building up some flow of these leaf shapes across the canvas. Then I'm going to kind of see how I can maybe relate these two better by maybe repeating some of the dark color somewhere else. I'm going to go into my bag of papers that you all have and see what other colors I can use. You also have a piece of tracing paper in the back of your kit. Put that aside for now. Some of you might use it, some of you might not, but you can just put that aside. That's not really a collage paper. I suppose it could be, but for our purposes today, it's not. I've included some old book pages. So shout out to libraries and their awesome library sales. I sometimes buy old books from library sales that I can collage with later. And so you have a couple pages. You've got a page from a dictionary in there. You've got a page from a book about personal habits, I guess. So, sometimes when I'm collaging, I try to think about how all the elements will go together, and if I can possibly add some meaning in that way. So sometimes I'll use words and text that relate to what I'm working on, but sometimes I'll just use the text more as like a visual texture, because of course it's always kind of interesting to see parts of a piece of writing or parts of a letter, something like that. So I'm kind of just going through my papers and looking at what I have in front of me, and what I already have down, and thinking of different things that I can overlap and add to my collage in interesting ways. So I think I might take some of this dictionary page, some of the A words, and maybe rip some pieces that I can put in different areas. Ooh, anthropomorphic. Okay, that's interesting. Good. So at this point, all of you can be kind of going through your papers, starting to glue some things down. If this is your first collage, please, well, for any of you really, have fun with it. Because, even in the beginning, even if you're not totally sure where it's going, there's always ways to bring it together. So I just recommend having fun with it. Sometimes I am more inspired by some fun papers that I find And I don't even have any idea where I want to go with it, but I just have to get those papers down somewhere. And so sometimes that's how I start a collage. So hopefully I gave you a few fun things to play with in your pack that can kind of inspire you. Okay, so I'm just doing a little bit of overlapping of some papers. And again, it might be a good idea. It might not be. I might do something different later. That's also a benefit of collage. You can always paint over it. You can always collage over it. Okay. Oh, I apologize in advance if my dog barks. My family just came home. Thinking about it. Okay. Are there any questions?
Everyone is very quiet today, just walking along with you, I think.
Are we allowed to ask a question?
Okay, well, I hope, I mean, if I'm going too fast or too slow, you know, let me know.
Oh, are we allowed to ask a question like this?
Verbally?
Yes, yes.
So I'm glue challenged, I would describe myself as, and I get like super messy when I'm dealing with glue. Is there a good way to be better about that and not have glue everywhere on the top and just
I mean, the trick with the glue that I gave you is to, I just kind of like dip just the very end of my foam brush in, and like I'm trying to make sure you can see it, and I don't let it pool like that. I kind of wipe it, and then I put a very thin coat on. The other thing is, you know, to change out, like if your surface that you're gluing on is getting gunky, like mine's pretty much full, I'm just going to fold it over and use the other side now so that I can add glue again without getting everywhere. Now, that said, I do usually have like sticky glued fingers like after this process. So I might not be much help in that sense. You're definitely going to get it on your fingers. But I will give you a tip if you're enjoying collage. There's another glue. I didn't include it because I really wasn't sure how it would keep for you guys in your kits for a couple of weeks. And it is called Yes Glue. I'm going to show it to you. And it's more like a paste, so it's not as gooey. And when I took a bookbinding course in Oaxaca, Mexico, like years and years ago, and this was the glue that was on our list for making artist books. And so it's good for gluing papers together. Sorry, I'm just trying to plug my earbuds back in. And it's not quite as, it's not gooey. So I'll show you on the demo camera here. It's called Yes Paste. And this stuff lasts forever. You can see this is a big container. It's actually what I will use only if I'm collaging on paper because it's less runny. And so it doesn't, sometimes liquid glue will make your paper wrinkle. And so it's not likely to do that with the paste. It lies flat. And so I'm going to open it for you to show you. It kind of looks like a tub of Vaseline. And what I use for that, I don't even use a brush. I save gift cards, like old gift cards, and I use it kind of like I'm filling a hole in the wall, you know, when you have to patch up a hole or something when you're repainting. I use it like that, and I spread it really thin over the paper that way. So if you do have a lot of troubles with liquid glue, and I get it because you know, it is kind of messy sometimes, I definitely recommend this. There wasn't really going to be a great way to get it to all of you. So, so we just went with the PVA, but I do use PVA a lot on the canvases. Like it will dry flat as long as you have a thin coat, and it's a good glue, but this one is really nice for the gooey gooey problem, not having the gooey problem.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna move these little gift cards out of the way. Okay, so we'll just keep going. That was great. That was a good question. Yeah, it can be a little messy. I'm definitely going to have to wash my hands in a little bit. I do usually recommend that definitely between the collaging and the drawing phase to kind of clean your hands off. But yeah, if you're just very careful with how you apply it to the foam brush and wipe it along the edge here, it's less likely to be as messy. So I'm going to keep gluing. So we'll kind of work on this part for a little while. Once you have kind of a good surface layer that you're happy with, we'll talk a little bit about adding watercolor to kind of give it a little bit of atmosphere before we start the nature drawing. Okay. So let's see. And I tend to always be a sucker for like gold and brown and blue. I don't know. I try to go beyond that. It just doesn't always happen. So here I am picking all the browns and golds and blues. And I hope all of you feel comfortable sharing yours maybe in a little bit. It'd be really cool to see. That's one thing, you know, I used to teach art to 7th and 8th graders, and that was one thing I always stressed is that, you know, we might be all working with the same materials, but the really cool thing is that we're going to all be doing something totally different, and that's great. You know, unlike a math class where we're all looking for the same answer, this is a place where we're going to start with the same things and wind up with something, all sorts of different, beautiful, amazing things. They didn't always believe me, but it's true. So you can kind of see I'm not necessarily planning things out in this stage. And you can, it really just depends on your style. But I'm just kind of looking at how things might fit together, deciding sort of on the spot if that's what I want to do. Sometimes I work this way, sometimes I am a little bit more deliberate. So it's really just a personal preference and it can change piece to piece. So that is a-okay. So here I'm just kind of overlapping a little bit some of my elements to kind of bring them together more. I feel like this dark blue up here is very stark and sort of comes out of nowhere. So I might do something to kind of balance that out down here. That's just sometimes I'm just sort of thinking out loud so that you can, you know, see what you might want to do as well, or how one might think about this as they go. So for me, I tend to kind of think about how can I balance this if I'm just in the paper stage. How can I balance this out, making it seem like it goes together, even though it's made of all different things. Oh, and see, I just did it. I over gooped it. I don't know if anyone caught that, but I definitely over gooped it that time. So I just brushed it off a little bit and thinned it out, but it got a little messy. Yeah, I might maybe cover up some of this blue up here. I just feel like it looks like a tornado. I'm not going for that. Let's see what else is in our paper pack. So you'll probably notice, and I mentioned this earlier, that in your paper pack, you've got kind of a wide variety of papers. And that's something I did on purpose because the great thing about collage work is that you can incorporate papers that are just, mail from around the house, things from magazines. That's what I did in high school. I used to just cut up National Geographic and Vogue magazines and make collages. Um, and then, it can also be book pages, old maps. We don't see those quite as much anymore with GPS on our phones, but they're there. Even if you've ever been to Paper Source, they have this like wall of beautiful handmade papers. Um, that's where I get a lot of the handmade ones. Like a lot of you have this blue cloudy one in your pack, or this orange and red uh, floral one is definitely a handmade paper from another country. So that's always an option. And then even like those sheets of gift wrap that you can find, not necessarily the roll. I've never really worked with a roll of gift wrap in collage, I don't think, but like the ones that are more like a regular paper, but they sell them by the sheet. Um, Sometimes there's some really cool designs on those that can be cut up into collage and old drawings. I used to use graph paper a lot in collages. Um, Anything really. And the nice thing is, some people are very concerned about things being archival. Um, I am not really worried about my work lasting for hundreds and hundreds of years at this point, just because I can scan things and create prints of them. But I do typically with these canvas or wood panels is I will um, give them a gloss varnish at the end, which or regular any kind of finished varnish, and that will seal in and a lot of it will seal in the papers and the paint, and a lot of them have like a UV protectant. So if you hang it somewhere in a very sunny area, it shouldn't fade too fast or anything like that. Um, but you could always, I mean, I guess in theory, you could have things framed in behind glass too for that same reason. But I am not at the point where I am an artist that needs to have their artwork last hundreds and hundreds of years. So I just give it a good gloss varnish and scan the ones that I really love so that they are with me in some way.
Oh, can I ask another question?
Go for it. Thank
So,
you. Yes.
how do you store your papers so that you can then find the pieces that you want for a certain composition?
Yeah. So I'm really lucky. I have years ago there was this store that had and you can still find these I think on homedepot.com, but like I have like a wooden flat file. So and it's pretty wide. It's probably it's about the same width as my desk. So I would say it's probably about oh gosh, like 3 or 4 feet wide. So I can keep them all flat that way for the larger papers. But the other thing I've done is for smaller papers, you can either get sort of like one of those like photo boxes that are, supposed to keep dampness out and things like that. Or like even those scrapbooking plastic bins. Sometimes I'll keep the smaller papers and things like that. But when they get into scrap form, like I probably won't throw this out because this, even if I don't use it today, I could use it somewhere else later. I put those in like kind of a shoebox sized box, and then like when I'm just really messing around, and I'm not even sure where I'm going with something, I will oftentimes look in that box and just try to and get inspired by little shapes and bits and pieces. But yeah, the big new sheets, I lay them flat in a flat file.
And do you sort them like by color or type of paper or anything? Or
Um, I well, At the moment, no. The only separation I have is like my watercolor, like my drawing papers and things like that, is in a separate drawer than my decorative papers. Um, so that's kind of the only thing I do right now for that, is just one drawer for those. But I do have, like I said, with the smaller papers that don't need to be in a flat file, I'll organize those differently. But no, I probably could use an organizational system. Yeah, but I just store them flat. That's kind of as far as I've gotten. I find, like I was saying earlier, I don't know what it is. I'll buy other color papers, but there's something about like blues and creams and golds and browns. So a lot of my paper tends to be similar. Um, if it's one that I've bought, like a big sheet of the fine art paper, sometimes I'll do something really contrasting with like a red. Like I just bought some Italian paper that has like a really cool red, uh, kind of looks like a ceramic tile print on it. Um, but otherwise, yeah, a lot of it kind of looks similar in some ways, anyways. So I don't necessarily organize by color, but it would be a good thing.
And so when you're going to like start a project, do you select from the papers and then sit down, or how do you?
Oh, yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, so depending on I'm what my goal is or what my idea is initially, um, I will kind of look through the papers for colors or textures that I think will fit the work. But there are definitely times when I just know I want to do something with collage and papers, and I just start building up a surface first. Now, sometimes that goes terribly. Like I started something over the winter holidays, and I just wound up throwing it out. I could not even envision what I would do with it. I just didn't really like how it turned out. So I do, oftentimes I'll have some sort of like, I have a subject that I want to incorporate, but sometimes I don't. So for instance, I'll show you like a small piece that actually might have been on the opening slide. So the smaller piece here, um, I knew I was going to draw some sort of floral element, but I wasn't sure it was going to be the magnolia. But it's a really small canvas. It's 6 by 6. And so I just started by putting down some papers and a stamp in the background. So there's not as much surface to work with. Um, so I just kind of started there and then looked through some of my old sketches and decided to add the magnolia over the top. So sometimes I will work that way, but sometimes I'm a little bit more deliberate in what I want. Yeah, if there's time at the end, I'll show like one of my more recent pieces that was definitely more deliberate, um, where I planned it out a little bit more.
And is there like a digital form of collage?
Yeah, I mean, you can do things like this with Photoshop, or, there's all these other apps now that I'm not even as familiar with, but I used to do that as well. Like just, I mean, like little, nothing professional or anything, but like if somebody needed a poster for something, um, you can definitely, if you go on Etsy, there's all these digital papers that you can purchase and download and kind of cut digitally and add them to things. Um, and that can be interesting, and I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole, but there's something about real papers and real painting and mark making that always brings me back to this. But the nice thing about digital collage is, A, there's no glue, and B, you can experiment so much with color change. moving pieces around with no real consequence, you know, so that is definitely a perk to working digitally. But I find that I don't know, and I don't think this is, you know, right necessarily, but I don't know that it's like valued as much by the general public as an art form. I don't think that's necessarily right because I've seen people put a lot of time in things, and there's definitely some skill and talent behind it. Um, but I do think for whatever reason, people, you know, still value kind of the original types of artwork, you know. But on the flip side, sometimes I think these digital things are so, they can be made and mass produced so quickly that, you know, you can buy things a lot cheaper that have a fine art look to them. And so then on the flip side, it makes it hard for somebody who does kind of one of a kind pieces to, um, you know, set the value of their artwork in a way that is marketable. All right, so I've kind of built up quite a bit of my collage. And this is interesting because this is the first time I have built up a collage while trying to talk the whole time. so, so definitely some of this has become a little bit autopilot. Um, and we'll see. We'll see how it turns out in the end. Because I'm just sort of like mindlessly gluing some things down at this point, just to kind of fill some spaces. How's everyone else doing? Are you feeling like you've built up your background layer pretty well at this point? Or would you like some more time? Oh, there's somebody in the waiting room. Ooh, oh my gosh, so pretty. Let me see that. Oh, I love it. Okay, I'm gonna just pin this picture so we can see it up close. Oh my goodness, that is beautiful. Wow, I love that. It's like a mother-daughter collage.
She really did most of it. I've been cooking some dinner.
I love it.
Thank you.
Cool.
I'm shy.
That's okay. I get it. I have a 5-year-old. All right. So I see someone just wrote in the chat that they are ready for the next step. So I'm going to glue this down. If you are still gluing and cutting or ripping, that's totally fine as well. I'm going to talk about the next step, which is about the paint. And so so we'll kind of get into that. At this point, you've got a couple choices. To use the brush again, you're going to want to rinse it out. It is one of those throwaway brushes, and if you have other foam brushes, you're welcome to do that. But if you do plan to use this again, you're going to want to just kind of rinse it under some cool water in the sink, just so that it doesn't get rock hard, because it will. So you might want to take a moment to do that, and then recap your paint, or I'm sorry, your glue, just in case you need more later. I will say that sometimes I'll add an element of collage kind of towards the end, or cut paper towards the end, just to kind of build up the layers a little bit more cohesively. So you might come back to it, you might not. Okay, so here's kind of where I'm at with mine. What I'm going to talk a little bit about next is what you can do to build up some more texture using paint. So I'm going to switch back to my presentation view. All right. Okay, and hopefully we can see that. I don't know if that's
Yep, it looks good.
okay, good. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. So we've talked a bit about composition. We've talked about getting those first layers down. And then this is actually that butterfly composition in the very beginning before I did anything else. One thing you'll notice that's on here that we won't be doing today, but just kind of another idea for you down the line, is I had a bunch of those like hole punchers that have different little images in them. So I had used those to cut little birds out of my paper and glued them down. So that's, you know, there's so many different things you can do to create different levels of interest. So you can kind of see in this corner here, there's some little cutout birds. And then you can see here, this is a stencil that I just bought from like the Michael's, you know, just like they have like those stencils for different projects. You know, sometimes I collect some of the ones that are just sort of classic designs that are sort of generic, but classic to use in collage work as well. So I collage, or I stenciled some paint over my layers here. And so that's always an option, you know, going forward. But the thing I'd like to show you now is here we have some paint that's just sort of added to create a little bit of depth to your piece. Now, what you have in your containers are white acrylic and just a navy acrylic. And again, if you're someone who does use acrylic paints, if you have other colors that you'd like to incorporate, you're welcome to use those. But what I'm going to just talk a little bit about is how I use the acrylic in the background. And I actually, one thing I love about acrylic is that you can use it completely full bodied, and then it's totally opaque. It dries, you know, it dries not see-through at all, or you can add a little bit of water to it and give it a little bit more of a translucent quality. So that's what I do when I'm adding a little bit of kind of atmospheric coloring to my first layer. So I'm going to show you that now. So I'll stop sharing this. Time for our second demo. So exciting. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to my collage. Okay, oh good, and it's 2:57. That seems good. Okay. Cool. You never know, like timing, if things will just fly or go painfully slow. I think we're at a good clip. All right, so I'm going to grab my blue paint. And you should have, at this point, I'm going to move my glue paper somewhere else so that it does not get crazy. And I'm going to have my cup of water nearby. You should have some sort of surface that you can use, a flat surface that you can use as a palette. Honestly, I use sometimes like the lids of old containers a lot to use as like a palette or like an old dish or something like that. I tend to use the flat ones for acrylic because I don't really want, instead of the ones with the little wells, I want to be able to move my paint around and blend and thin it out. So that's why I prefer like a flat palette versus one that comes with those little holes. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my my brush and I'm going to just take a little bit of the acrylic navy. And I'm going to just put a little bit of it here in our palette area. And so, you know, it's kind of like a medium body. I'd say it's not one of the really thick acrylics, which is nice because then you can kind of layer it up how you like. But what I do for the background, so sometimes when I first just glue things down, it just feels a little bit like I just came and glued a bunch of stuff to a piece of paper, and we did. But I want it to be a little bit more, have a little bit more depth. So that's when I take acrylic and I add a little bit of water. So I'm just going to dip that same brush in my water, like you see here. And I'm just going to add a little bit of water to the palette. So you can see now the color is looking a little lighter to the right side here. Maybe I'll add a little bit more. You know, acrylic is kind of nice in the way that you can water it down a little bit. You don't want to go totally overboard, I suppose, but it does let you water it down a bit. And then I just kind of look at my piece. I think about areas that I might want to give a little bit of extra edge or shadow or something to kind of bring the pieces together. And this is a part where it's a nice idea to have like a little piece of your paper towel ready in case you really hate something, because then you can just kind of wipe it up. So if you really don't like what you just did, you can wipe it up a little bit, especially if it's on the canvas, or you can blot it a little bit. And so this part's a little bit experimental. You got to be a little bit okay with things not being perfect, um, and just kind of going with the flow here. So here I'm just kind of adding a few, I'm just kind of bringing the paper and the canvas together in a way. So I've added some of my watered down paint to this corner here. And then what I do sometimes to bring it together is I'll put a little bit of the less watered down, just the straight paint, and I'll add it maybe in this crevice here, to kind of deepen it. And then I will take my brush, I'm going to rinse it a little bit. And when I rinse it, the thing about acrylics is if you don't want it to be watery, you always want to kind of dry your brush on the paper towel, just kind of rinse and then dab dry, like you can see here. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get it just a little bit wet so that I can push the color around a bit and blend and fuzz it out. And so I'm just taking my brush and I'm just kind of fuzzing it out here so that it's not just a big slab of paint. And then this is where sometimes having a paper towel is handy because I can also dab a little bit of water and just kind of wipe it out with the towel to kind of blend it out more. So here we're just kind of using the paint to create a little bit of atmosphere. We're going to come back to the paint when we add some drawn in elements, but what I'm trying to do is build up some atmosphere and build up some more cohesion of the layers. And one thing you'll start to notice, especially if you're adding paint over paper, is that some of the papers are really interesting when you add paint over it. So for instance, this gold and cream colored paper that I have, that some of you might have in your pack, is the gold stays on the surface, but the color of the paper becomes this blue. So it's kind of interesting the way some of these will, when you add a little water to the acrylic, will, you know, soak up some of the color, but then if it's got kind of a screen printed quality, which some of the home handmade papers do, that screen printed ink will kind of rise to the top and the paint won't really cover it. So I think that's kind of a cool way to sort of incorporate and blend things together. So I'm using just the blue right now, but I have white here because sometimes you want to have some sort of a highlight or something like that. So you're welcome to do the same thing with the white. If there's areas that you want to kind of brighten up, you can do kind of the same technique. So right now I'm just just kind of going with the flow, adding a little bit of the watered down acrylic here. There will be a time later when we don't necessarily use it watered down. We use it more like a classic watercolor, or I'm sorry, classic acrylic. But I do find for the background, as I'm just kind of layering things, it's nice to have more of a translucent quality or like a blended quality. But that's also a style thing because on the flip side, sometimes it's kind of nice to run like a big streak of paint across something too. So it's kind of up to you. That is the one thing that might frustrate um, some artists, if some of you artists, because if you're kind of like to have sort of a roadmap, there's many different turns with collage, so lots of different options. Okay, so I'm just kind of doing a little bit. I'm not going to overdo it because this might be something that you come back to after you add your drawn elements. You might decide, oh gosh, I think I need a little bit more shadow or depth in this region once you've added your drawn elements to the top. All right, so I'm going to let that sit for a minute. That's another good reason to use more of the watered down, is because we do need to move on in a moment. So it does have to dry a bit. So I'm going to just rinse my brush and just set it back on the paper towel off to the side here. I apologize because my phone just decided to go back down again. I'm into the phone. All right. So you can see that there's a little more shadow or depth in here. People who really like to build up like a surface with paint can take this even further. Sometimes people like the dripped qualities, and so they might run a line of the watered down paint at the top and then raise up their canvas and let it just kind of run down. That can be very cool. Usually you have to kind of let those layers dry in between or give them a chance to set up. So that's not something I'm gonna do right now, just for the sake of time. But that's also, you know, something that can be really neat, is building up layers of paint that way. All right, so I'll give everyone a chance to finish that step, and then just you know, you can leave your paint out because we'll come back to it fairly soon. But just rinse your brush. Take a sip of water. Does anyone else want to share theirs? So give this about a minute. I'll give you guys a little time to add paint. And again, if you want to go thicker in some areas, or, you know, if you like to add some sort of interesting pattern or texture with the paint, that's, you know, that's of course like another option. And you could do that with the white paint as well. Again, I kind of, for the sake of it being a 2-hour workshop, I did sort of limit our color palette, but if you have other acrylics that you want to use, you're welcome to use those as well. And I'm thinking of these butterflies, but I might add those maybe towards the end after I draw some elements in. And these butterflies are actually an example of, actually this was a scrap paper, but I have a whole other sheet of butterflies like this that were one of those flat sheet wrapping papers. So this is kind of an example of the types of things you could find when you go looking for them at places like Paper Source or Thick Blick. All right, how's everyone doing? Good, good, bad, bad. Okay. Okay, so what I'll start to do as we're letting the paint dry is talk a little bit about the next step, which is incorporating some nature drawing to your work. And this is where you'll need a pencil, possibly your tracing paper, depending on the approach you decide to take. And then we will eventually be getting to our micron pen as well. But we will probably, most of you will be adding some paint to yours again. So the micron pen that you got in your kit, these are my favorite kinds of pens. They are waterproof, so they're the type of pen that if you draw on it and then go over it later in watercolor, it won't run, which is great. And they have all different size tips. So the micron pen is very nice for adding kind of finishing details. I usually use it towards the end of my project, and definitely when paint is dry, so that you don't ruin the tip of the pen. So, so what I'll do is I'll go back to the presentation and talk a little bit about the next step, unless anyone wants me to wait a little longer. Okay, I don't see any hands or anything, or hear anyone, so I assume we'll keep on moving. Okay, So we've gone through kind of 2 layers so far. Um, and so what we're going to talk about next is incorporating drawings into your collage work. So from what I gather, it sounds like a lot of you have taken classes before, and so you might have a sketchbook of drawings, or you might have some resources that you look to when you draw. And so this is a really great way to use some of those things. So oftentimes I will incorporate work from my sketchbook into collages, but there are times when I just work directly uh, on the collage as well. So it just kind of depends on the situation. So what I'm going to talk about now is some ways to add or transfer drawings to your collage surface. But since we're still waiting for things to dry a little bit, I think before that, I want to talk a little bit about places to find ideas on your emailed supply list of things that were not in the kit. You were asked to either find a small nature item, like an actual object, or a photograph, either that you took or maybe from Pixabay or another free image site online, or just sketches that you have already. And this is, this is not a drawing workshop. I mean, I can certainly try to give pointers where possible, but the reason I say this is that I don't want anyone to feel like you have to be photorealistic artists to create a really cool nature collage. So what I'm going to work from today is, excuse me, a dried hydrangea. I kind of refer to these as like Midwest tumbleweeds, because in the wintertime in our neighborhood, they seem to be like rolling everywhere. My neighbor has like 3 beautiful bushes that just dry out, and then we've got these little dried flowers that snap off in the wind and roll all over the place. So I kind of scoop them up when I can. So we've got these dried hydrangeas. Now they look very scary and very complicated. I am not going to be drawing the whole bunch today. I'm going to focus on a few individual flowers. And so that's always an option when you find things that inspire you. If they look daunting, you can just focus on one aspect of something. You can break it apart. You can draw half of it, however you want to do it. You can zoom in on one area. It's really up to you. So so there's a couple ways that I usually get drawings onto my collage surfaces, and so that is what I will show you now. And again, this is going to be interesting because I didn't know exactly where this collage was going to wind up. I just knew that I was going to do something with hydrangeas and something with these leaf-shaped papers in my collage. So we'll see. We'll see how this looks. It could be great. It could be not so great. So I'm going to go back to the camera view and talk about different ways to add drawn elements. So what I did is ahead of time on my tracing paper, I traced out some flowers from one of my sketchbook drawings on the tracing paper. Now, the reason I'm using tracing paper is because there's a couple different ways you can transfer this to a canvas. And so I'm going to go over those possibilities right now. And then the other option is to just draw something directly on your canvas. And that's something I'll do also, just to kind of show both ways. So when you have a sketch or a drawing that you want to include in a collage, and you want to do it using tracing paper, you want to get the design the way you want it on the tracing paper. This is very rough, just a quick tracing that I did. And there's a couple ways you can do it. Some people have like this kind of like old carbon paper, but not as messy, that you can use to transfer. I find that those types of papers don't work as well on collaged surfaces. So I just use the method that maybe you're familiar with, that you might have done, where I take a softer pencil, not too soft, but softish, and I just turn it over to the back, and I just kind of shade the back to give it a coat of graphite. And then what I'm going to do in a moment is just trace back over these lines directly into a spot on my canvas. And this lead that I'm coloring on the back of my tracing paper will rub off onto the canvas where I press down. The other thing I could have done, since I guess I don't really care if this is mirror image or not, is I could have just done this directly on here and scribbled on the back and just gotten an impression of this in mirror image. But if you have something that definitely has to be one way, then you want to color the back off of your surface that you're transferring, and then you'll put your canvas down. I'm going to flip this over and just kind of look around where I might want to add it. So I'm thinking of, because I'm going to add these drawn elements and then add some paint over it. So I'm thinking of a couple of things. I'm thinking of what areas would I want to add paint to? What areas do I want to have this finer drawing or line work? You know, is it going to be my focal point? Things like that. Do I want it to overlap with the papers a lot, or do I want it to kind of be its own thing, maybe off into this area where there's a lot of blue paint showing? So those are the types of things I try to think about when I'm getting ready to transfer a drawing, is the placement of where I want it. So then I would usually just take another sharp pencil and go over the lines to transfer it, but I'm going to use a colored pencil just so that you can see and I can see where the lines are that I've already traced, so we can kind of follow along better. So I'm just using a very fine Prismacolored pencil, like a red one, so that you can kind of watch with me and see. So I'm thinking, because another thing that I'm going to do is show you how I would just draw directly on the canvas. So I'm going to draw like maybe one enlarged flower just directly on the canvas. So because of that, because I'm going to play with scale a bit, I think I might place this maybe over here, and then do a more of an enlarged one over in this corner. So I'm going to just place this down. You know, if you're worried about it moving, you can always tape it down, but since I don't have too much to trace, I'm just going to hold it in place and do the best I can. One thing with canvases like this is you do have to be a little bit careful how hard you press down, because you can potentially poke a hole in your canvas if you're a little too rough. So you want to just kind of look and see if there's a light line. Now this, I warn you, is going to be pretty light if you do it this way, because between the papers and the color of the paint underneath, you won't catch a lot of the graphite, or it might be hard to see some of the graphite as you trace over. So there might be a little bit that you have to go back in and re-sketch or darken so that you kind of know where you're going with it. And so it's a little hard, I'm sure, to see what I'm doing, but basically I'm going over the outlines of these little hydrangea petals that I had already prepared for today. And again, some of it's going to transfer nicely onto the paper and some of it might not, depending on what is underneath it. So, and I do kind of anticipate that. So it's not a bad idea to kind of have that sketch handy, or that photo, or whatever it might be that you're working from, that actual object, just so that you can refer to it when you remove the tracing paper. And add any extra details that you need to, because I can tell already this is going to be a little bit tough to see. But if you had like some light areas or light papers, you would see it a little bit easier. So I can see I've removed it. It's probably incredibly hard to see on the camera for you, but you can see a few lines showing through. And so at this point, I do one of two things. I either take just my pencil and go over the lines a little darker, or I might just take the Micron pen itself and start to outline. It depends on, how dry everything is and how confident you're feeling in your line work at the moment. So I'm going to just probably go over mine because I know I'm going to paint a lot of it. I'm just going to go over mine with pencil, and I have the tracing paper with the drawing on it that I just used right next to me as well, so that I can sort of refer to it in the areas that didn't transfer as well. And the nice thing about hydrangeas, even though they seem incredibly scary to draw, is that they are just like these little 4-petal flowers. So if if I'm not quite sure, I just have to remember, okay, well, it has 4 petals, so that's what I'll draw if I have to make up a little bit of it. And so, and again, this is not necessarily a drawing workshop, um, you know, that, so don't feel like you have to have this amazing drawing, because we're also going to paint over and add some ink work over it. And in the end, I think they'll all look really neat, just with the different layers and buildup of textures. So I'm just going to kind of add a few more darkened lines just so I can see where I'm going when I get to the paint stage. And then I'll show you what I do when I'm just sketching directly onto the canvas, which looks a lot like this. But if there's any questions, please feel free. Okay, so it's a little hard to see. I'm probably going to have to wing it a little bit with the paint, but that's okay. And then, so that's one way to get a drawing onto your page. The other way, and I do this just as much, just as often, because sometimes it is hard to see what you're transferring, is I will just draw an object directly on here. So I'll use either my sketch that I've already done and draw from that, or I will just sketch it again freehand. So here I've pulled just a few little pieces off of the hydrangea bunch that I had shown you. And I'm just gonna like take my pencil, and I usually for this, because it's canvas with acrylic, it can be kind of hard to see one of the H pencils. So I use a B, but whatever you're comfortable with, whatever kind of pencil you like. I'm going to sharpen it a little bit. And so when I'm sketching out something like this, I tend to like to look for the mid veins to kind of direct me. And so I kind of start out by mapping out where the flowers are going to go, using like their midsections, like just almost like the backbone of the flower, and then coming in, move this down a little bit, and then coming in and drawing out the petal. And I'm not worried right now about like a lot of detail. Like, I mean, you could go crazy with veins and things like that. But I'm also going to still be painting this with acrylic. So I know some people who are watercolor artists like to get a lot of the detail down in the drawing form first. And but I feel like with acrylic, it just winds up getting swallowed up anyways. So you might as well just draw the basic outline and then come back in with your paint and your pen later to get the rest of it. So I've drawn one. There's also these cool little stems that are just kind of winding around on this thing. And I'm being pretty quick just for the sake of time. But again, you don't, it's also because we're going to be adding some acrylic over this, it doesn't have to be totally perfect. It's more of like a guideline for where your paint's going to go. So I'm just drawing a few of the flowers, and I've decided kind of design wise to enlarge them on this part. So the other ones are more closer to life size. Over on this part of the painting, they're a little bit larger. So that was just a design decision that I made. as I looked at my piece with the layers of paper and things like that. I thought it might be nice to feature a larger um, version. I'm just kind of sketching those in, and you know, if you are feeling good about this process, you can start sketching yours in. And what's nice about this, because I think a lot of times people just sort of think of collage as like a mess of papers together and you know, maybe some paint, but I think this kind of combines you know, the beauty of drawing and painting as well. But it gives like an instant punch, a little more pizzazz right away because you've got all these cool layers underneath, and then over top again, we can add more. So it's kind of a nice way to develop a piece. All right, now that navy blue cloud paper, that is hard to draw on. Very pretty, but difficult to draw on. Okay. All right, so I've got those. Now, this is kind of a situation where I could decide that maybe I would want like a little hydrangea, maybe by itself down here, like one little flower down here in the corner because it's looking a little sad down there. So I can sort of look at this thinking back to that groups of threes and eye flow and all that stuff and just kind of throw in some other elements or some other aspects of the hydrangea where I feel like it needs something. And this is something you can do now, or it's something that you might decide later as you're close to finishing, thinking, oh, I think it needs something down there. I'm going to add a hydrangea or whatever it is that you're working with. Okay, so I've drawn those in. Are there any questions, comments? I hope everyone's doing well. It's so quiet. Okay, and it is 3:27, so this is where we're gonna kind of keep moving. So I've got my drawn elements, and if you're just kind of watching along, that's fine. It might be something that you want to add to later. Oh, yay! Someone's sharing. Thanks, Lila. Oh, that's beautiful. Oh my gosh. So did you those flowers? Are those from a painting? Oh, you're on mute.
It was from a birthday card.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's great.
That one, and then this one was an Easter card that I just threw away, but then I dug it out of the garbage.
There you go. That's awesome. I love it. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. That's so cool. Yeah, and so that's the thing. I mean, I'm adding drawings. You don't have to add drawings. You could add other things. Sometimes I just use the pen and the paint just to add some line work at the end. But yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lila. Beautiful. Okay, so what I'll do is I will share my screen again, my other screen, so many screens, and talk a little bit about the next step. So we've talked about paint already. So at this point, what I usually do is start to add more of the full-bodied paint to those drawn elements to bring them out, to pop them out so that they're more on the surface of my artwork. And so at this point, I'll kind of go back to painting with the white and the black. And I tend to, sometimes I still use a watered down, especially if I'm trying to just add a little bit of a highlight, I might use a watered down white over top something, or, you know, I might use the watered down blue as a shadow color. So it's up to you. And again, you know, I've limited your palette greatly. So if you need other colors and have other colors, you're welcome to use them. But I do find that sometimes when you're just starting out, it's nice to have limits because sometimes too many choices, it's like analysis paralysis. At least I have that. So I'm going to just kind of go back to painting on the demo camera, and then we'll talk a little bit about ways to finish it up and add some finishing touches. So I guess I didn't really need to share that. That wasn't totally necessary. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the demo area. I'm going to get my paints ready again. And here I'm just going to start by giving them maybe like a base. It kind of depends how bright you want to go, I guess, in full honesty. So I'm going to scoop some of my white paint into my palette. Let me kind of center my camera a little bit more for all of you. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to put some of the white paint in my palette just so that I have the option to change the color a little bit or darken it or water it down, because it might come off as very stark, bright white if I leave it just as it is on mine. But it might be something that you're going for on yours. So whatever fits your taste and what you're working on is totally fine. All right, and every once in a while, it's not a bad idea to refresh your water if it's starting to get too cloudy. I'm going to put a little bit more of the indigo color in my palette just so that it's wet and ready to go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, and this is just how I'm approaching this, but I'll kind of talk through it. Is I just added a little bit of water to my brush, and then I just kind of took a little bit of the blue into the white. And the reason I'm doing that is just because I think the bright white might be a little bit too bright, and I want to have a chance to use it as a highlight if I need to. So now what I'm doing is I'm just using my brush to fill in the petal shape on mine. Depending on what your nature object is, you might want to fill it in with one color, or you might be kind of switching back and forth to different shades of color, different shades of the blue or the white, however you want to think about it. All right, I'm going to switch to a little bit of a smaller brush. These are a little delicate. Okay. And so you can see the nice thing about acrylic paint is that it will just kind of sit right on top of your paper when you don't water it down. So it sits on top of the different papers. And so I like that aspect because I like when you overlap your drawn elements with the papers underneath, it does add a little unity. It kind of connects the pieces, connects the elements a little bit better when it's overlapped like this. But it does it in a way where it doesn't feel like there's paper bulging out behind it. So right now I'm just kind of filling in those petals. I'm not worrying too much about detail or anything just yet. I'm just kind of filling in a base coat. So whether it's a bird or a flower or a pine cone, whatever it might be that you're adding to yours, sometimes it's a nice idea to just add kind of a main tone to the areas. Oh, Lila, you're still your mic is still on, which is totally fine. I just wanted you to make sure that you know that, just in case. I know for me, I usually have to keep myself on mute during certain parts of the day because my dog is very upset by the mailman. Pretty cliche, but it's true. She's napping right now, though. Luckily, the mailman already came. It's good timing. Okay, so you can see I'm just sort of filling in some areas and adding some tone right off the bat to the drawn areas that I made. Some of this is starting to blur together, but it's going to come together once I use the pen and even add a little shading with the paint. So I'm also thinking about these hydrangea have these cool little stems that sort of weave all around, and they're super thin. So I might use, that could be something that I go back with later with a pen, or if I'm feeling brave, I'm going to try it. I'm going to use a little bit of the indigo color and just try to be really careful with the brush. Some of them sort of go right up to the back of the flower if we're seeing the back of it. I'm just kind of adding in those little teeny tiny skinny stems. And here, you know, I'm not as worried about what the original drawing looked like at the moment because I'm sort of taking cues from what I'm seeing on my canvas. So if it feels like something needs maybe a little bit of a stem or something, or a little more white or whatever the case might be, I'm taking those cues now from the work, the piece in front of me. All right, I'm going to add a little bit more white to my palette. Mix it a smidge. And then I'm going to try to get in here with these little guys. So the ones that I used the transfer method with the tracing paper, I'm coming in now and just painting in the petals. Now that drawing was a little bit more clumped together, so I might do like one flower on its own and then skip a section and paint another flower so that I don't, you know, wind up with one big blob. Okay, and then you can kind of see, I'll hold this up a little bit closer. So I've got kind of like one little coat on those hydrangeas in the upper left corner. And then what I'm gonna do is just, you know, play with value a little bit, maybe water down some of the indigo color and layer it on top to add a little bit of shading in those petals. But really that is completely up to you how stylized you might want it to look, or how realistic or three-dimensional or flat, you know, all those sorts of things are sort of a personal preference. But I might just add like a little bit of layering to the petals. And I kind of go back and forth between using like a watered down acrylic versus the full bodied. I think part of the reason is, you know, I've over the past several years working on botanical illustration, I've become a little bit more comfortable with watercolor than with acrylic. So I tend to use them in a similar way. But certainly, you know, you can build up acrylic wet on wet and, you know, get an effect that you might like. But I do realize that that might just be kind of a personal design flaw, as I tend to default to a watercolor kind of approach with my acrylics. I'm just kind of adding in, while it's wet, I'm kind of going back and forth and just building up some of the depth on the petals just to kind of give it, like, you know, so that not all the petals are exactly the same tone or value. You know, if something's a little bit more in shadow, I just kind of give it a little bit more shading. And right now it's looking a little you know, a little blobby, a little unrefined. But this is kind of the great thing about the pen later is that that's a chance where we can really clean things up and add some line work that is a little bit harder to accomplish with the acrylics unless you've got a lot of time and a really good understanding of acrylic painting. Okay, so I've kind of built up a little bit of different values here on these corner hydrangeas. I'm going to just add a little bit more white over top just to give a couple little pops. And this is definitely a little bit more impressionistic at this point. Just with these dabs of colors. So that's, you know, that's one way to go. Okay, so there's kind of some different values starting to peek through here. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here with these other little guys. I should probably take a check. Okay, 3:41. Wow, time flies. So, and you know, it sounds like a lot of you have taken painting classes. So you know, I mean, I'm doing this really quick and a little rushed here. But painting, you know, whether it's watercolor or acrylic, is usually a buildup of layers and time and going back and forth. You know, you don't just do it in one swoop. So I'm kind of rushing through a little bit just so that I can show some final steps and give some pointers for finishing things. But you of course can go at whatever speed is good for you. And my hope is that parts of this at least will be dry enough to show some pen work in the next few minutes. But that might not be the case for all of you. And it definitely won't be the case for my entire painting, but that's okay. You'll kind of get the idea. All right, so I'm gonna come down here and get this little guy in the corner, in the bottom, get those petals started. Okay. All right, so I still have a few to paint in, so I might just kind of quickly maybe get one more in, add a couple little stems, and then we can start talking about the pen and what you can do with that. Okay, I feel like it needs something over here. Okay, so I'm just kind of rinsing and then drying because now I'm going to go back in real fine with a little bit of the navy paint. Maybe add a little bit of the stems. I probably will add more hydrangeas later because I don't feel like this composition is coming together yet. But I do want to make sure that we have some time to talk about the Micron pen. So I will just kind of wrap up the area I'm working on. Now, this is also a moment where sometimes I decide that I might like this line work that's happening with the stems of the hydrangea, and I might decide to kind of maybe just randomly repeat that in different places in the collage, just to kind of bring a little bit more continuity. So things like that kind of pop up as well. Like you might just kind of decide that there's just aspects that you want to bring to other areas. So you can see I'm starting to kind of bring some of the stem work down into this region where I didn't really draw anything, but I think it's kind of interesting. So that's, you know, that's something that you can sort of take artistic license and do as you see fit, because in the end, this is the composition, not what you brought in your picture, not what you have in your sketchbook. This is the composition that is going to be the finished piece. So if it feels like it needs, you know, some more continuity in some way, and you can achieve that by adding some other elements that maybe weren't in the original drawing or sketch or photo, that's totally allowed. Good stuff. Okay. So again, I don't think this is quite built up the way I would like it completely, but we are going to move on to the pen because it's 3:46. So I'm going to go back to the screen for a moment. Okay, so this is where you can really add, you know, like I said, as you're painting layers, you can see on this collage that I made, I used white, a little bit of the indigo, and then I had this sort of seafoam color paint that I mixed with the indigo and the white to make the leaves. But at the end, I came back and outlined these cherry blossom flowers with the ink to add kind of a final detail and some strong line work to the piece. So I use microns for that. You can see in the picture on the left here, these are some of my favorite supplies, the different microns. And then I even sometimes use like white gel pens to add highlights to things or line work that, that you might want in white. So that's kind of a cool tool to use as well. So we're going to do that. We're going to add some line work to this piece. And again, the nice thing is with the micron pen, I usually use it closer to the end, but it doesn't mean that you have to be done with it completely. So I've definitely used micron pen and then decided later that I need to add some more paint to something. But it does add a nice finished element or more detail to your piece when you add the pen. So you all have a micron that is a 0.05. So that's one of their like kind of thicker tips of the artist pens, but I figured for this size canvas, it would work well to be kind of bold enough, but not too thick, but enough to sort of see what you're doing. So I'm going to work on, this time I am going to zoom it in a little bit because pen's always a little harder to see from afar. So this part of my painting is dry enough. Like I said, you definitely don't want to use the micron on wet paint. So if yours is still wet, you might want to hold off. Most of this is dry. I'm going to avoid that area there because it's a little drippy, but this is where I would come back and add a little bit of, you know, if you're the type that likes to draw, it's kind of the time where you can bring in those drawn elements, you know, add that like fine detail that you might not achieve the same way with acrylic, you know, so this is where I start to add in those sorts of details. If like the petal was flipped up, for instance, I can kind of add that in an easier way. And of course, you could do this with the paint. If you really love working in acrylic paint, it's definitely something you could build up slowly and make a really strong piece out of. But the pen is nice because it does sort of add a texture that is harder to achieve with the paint and with the papers and everything else. So it kind of just adds a whole other richness to it, I think, that you wouldn't necessarily get with the other materials. So here I'm just kind of adding, like, you know, I can notice on the actual hydrangeas that there's like these sort of like these midline veins. And then there's even like, you know, if I really wanted to, there's like these little kind of darker ends at the top of the petal that I could just do a little bit of like dots or dashed lines to represent. And again, I'm moving a little faster than I would normally just because we're kind of close to the end of our workshop, but you know, this can be as detailed or as loose as you want. You know, if you want it to have more of the sketch look, like more of a gestural look, you can kind of be a little more free with the pen. You could try different thicknesses, things like that. So here I'm just kind of adding a little bit of detail. It's not my best hydrangea, but it will do. But I mean, the beautiful thing about all of this is that you can always kind of go back into it and rework it a little bit, which I probably would do with this one, is maybe just kind of go back in and add a little bit more, you know, take my time a little bit more with some of the painting and things like that. You can outline like little line work that you want to emphasize more. I'll show you another collage of mine that is finished where I use the pen as another form of textural buildup. So, you know, I'm using it right now just to kind of emphasize these hydrangeas a little bit more, but you can definitely use it throughout your piece in different ways. So I'll show you. So I have a couple of finished collages that you can see, like with this mourning dove. I've used the pen. Sorry, it's a little, you can kind of get a glare because of the shine of the gloss, but I've used the pen to kind of add to the background a little bit. Just kind of random marks just to build up that texture. So there's different ways to use the pen. This one with the magnolia, kind of the same idea as with the hydrangea, just some outline work. And then I did use it a little bit in the background, like the mourning dove, just to build up some texture in the background. And then with this one that I used, you know, the same supplies that you all have, is ahead of time, I added just some straight pen drawing to it as well, you know, from some of my sketches. So we've got about 7 minutes left. I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions or wants to share their piece. Ooh, hi, Annie. I'm going to see if we can see your video. Oh my gosh. Oh, that turned out awesome. Wow, Annie, that's beautiful. Wow.
Thank you. It was lots and lots of fun. Thanks.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yeah, that turned out really nice. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question or share? Hi,
Christina?
Jean. Yes. Oh my God, that is so cool. All right, hang on. I got to make you bigger for me. Oop. Oh, that is so cool. Oh my God.
So I thought I would put in the pussy willows because my bush is starting to bloom. So you would come down on the actual branches with the white paint also, and then use the micron for the 3-dimensional then.
That's what I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I do. Sometimes like with like a stem like that, I'll shade with the paint, you know, give it that cylindrical effect, but then like kind of get more detailed with the pen. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Ooh, so cool.
Great fun. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. That's awesome. So cool. All right, let me see if I have anything else on the slideshow that I didn't say. And then if there's any other questions or anyone wants me to, no, there isn't. This is kind of the end of the show. This is actually the piece that I said if I had more time to show. Somebody at the beginning asked, you know, do you always know exactly what you want to do when you start laying the papers down? This is an example of a piece that's was very intentional for me. And although I will say I didn't know exactly where I was going to place some of the drawn elements like the storks and the flax flowers. But it was a piece that had like a definite path from the beginning. It's a piece that was inspired by a book that I recently read called Voices of Chernobyl, an oral history of nuclear disaster. Not a light read. It's a historical account through voices of people who were part of the Chernobyl disaster in some form, whether they lived near there or had family or worked in the disaster somehow back in 1986. And the book just, I don't always create artwork that's directly inspired by a book, but just the description of some of these affected regions, especially in Belarus, of like, you know, these places that would become contaminated and dangerous to live in, but still beautiful. They would describe these forests full of like the mushrooms that they would, you know, hunt for during mushroom season, and their national bird is the stork, and they would, you know, consider it maybe good luck if they saw a stork in a field. But at the same time, there was just this invisible danger. It just stuck with me. It was this haunting book where, you know, just this idea of this man-made disaster and what it looked like to be there, but at the same time, the things that you didn't see. So I definitely started out intentionally. The book pages that I have in here were actually from a book I bought at a library sale years ago that was written in Russian, and it was all about Russian folklore. So I thought it was sort of a good kind of juxtaposition to this idea of how people reacted to this disaster, whether or not they went back to where they used to live and why, and some of the lies that were told to some of the people about where they lived or what would happen to their children and things like that. It was just this interesting combination of a book about Russian folklore and this event. So I combined those, and then I was very intentional with the types of papers that I cut out, and I used those bird punches to kind of show like almost like a disappearance of good, healthy nature, but also with these native plants and animals to the region that were still there and seemingly okay, even though it was, you know, a contaminated area. So that was a collage that I was definitely more planned it out more ahead of time. But still, there's always this level of piecing things together and seeing how things look together that's a little bit less formal with collage. So that is the end of my presentation and my demonstration, but I am happy to take any questions or see you know, any of your pieces. Oh my gosh, it's 3:59. My goodness.
Thanks, Christina. This was awesome. I love that this is a project where artists can really put their own creativity into it. That's really cool. Your artwork is beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
this was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah. This is awesome. Does anyone, before we leave, want to share their artwork really quick if you haven't already? It's a quiet bunch. It's you know, it's kind of nap time after lunch and everything on a Saturday, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can always, I mean, anyone who ever has other questions, you're always welcome to email me. I'm on Instagram too, and I have a webpage. So you're always welcome to reach out if you have other questions. I'm happy to answer.
Awesome. And I'll include some of that information in our follow-up email, which will come out Monday too.
That would be great. Awesome.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. You guys have a good rest of your weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.